Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here for episode 740 with Rick Pastoor. If your calendar or time feels out of control, like you're not getting it put onto what really matters to you, Rick has got boatloads of solutions. Rick's written a book about productivity tools and really walks the talk when it comes to doing this stuff. So you'll learn 1, why your calendar isn't working and how you can fix it. 2, powerful questions to keep you on track. And 3, the simple trick to knocking out your biggest tasks. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items we've referenced, please drop on by awesomeatyourjob.com/EP740. And if you're hanging out at awesomeatyourjob.com, please check out some of our goodies like the full text transcripts that are all searchable, as well as the Gold Nugget email summaries, which gives you a quick wisdom from each of the guests in an email you can read in about 2 or 3 minutes, as well as unlocking the vault. The vault 740 of these summaries now. We call those the Gold Nuggets over at awesomeatyourjob.com. Now here's Rick's story. Rick Pastoor has always liked experimenting at work. He'll try things out, keep what works, and ditch what doesn't. Try, rinse, repeat. In his time at Blendle, the New York Times-backed journalism startup, Rick steadily refined his methods. That's where Grip was born, a flexible collection of tools and insights that helped the team do their best work. He self-published the book in Dutch in 2019, and Grip became an overnight bestseller in Holland. And Rick's mission today is the same, helping people make smarter decisions about their time. He divides his own time between his young family in Amsterdam, giving talks on Grip, his weekly newsletter, Work in Progress, and his startup Rise, where he's building a next-generation calendar app. Big thanks to Rick for sharing his wisdom with us. Big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that. And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. And here he is. Rick, welcome to How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so excited to dig into your wisdom and hear about the book Grip and your startup rise. But first, I think we got to go back in time a little bit. I understand there was a moment in your life when you received a letter from your mayor as a youngster that made quite an impact. What's the story here?
Yeah. Okay. This story is about when I think it was around 6. And on my birthday, my 6th birthday, I received a letter from the municipality, like the local enforcement. And it said, "Thank you, Rick, for cleaning up for us." So as I was young, and still do, but I cared about the environment in the city and the local neighborhood, actually. So I started cleaning up stuff when I saw it. And then I brought it home, and then my parents had to take care of it. And for years, I thought that this letter was real, like it was signed from the mayor. And then at age, I think it was 12 or 13, I once I brought up this letter, like, hey, it was actually like weird that I got this letter from these, like, how did I do that? And then my parents like, dude, that was fake. That was something that we made up. So actually, I spent years thinking that people in the city actually cared about this kind of stuff, that they noticed me. And I think the reason for sharing this is that, one, I always have cared about the idea that there are some rules that can be helpful, can be like ideas that we should care about to keep things in order. And that brings you something, some idea of like, you enjoy being in a space that's nice and neat. So that's one idea. And the second is that while this was fake, this learned me that noticing these small things that people do that are working well can have a huge, like a years long effect of how they perceive the world, how they think about themselves and stuff like that. So since then, I have made it a habit to try to notice this stuff and reach out to other people and share this with them.
So like, hey, I noticed this and it's really cool. Thank you. Like that sort of thing.
I think that kind of stuff. And I think that's, I don't know if you've ever, like, of course you're producing this podcast and you do other stuff. Like, people think that you get bombarded with messages all of the time. And of course, you probably get a lot of stuff. But still, I also found that like the book sold over 70,000 copies here in the Netherlands. And people think that I've like hundreds of emails. Of course, that's like the number of well-written and thoughtful emails that you get, that someone that researched you or someone that really took the time, I can count on one hand every week. So it's really easy to stand out in that sense. And I found that to be true for the biggest CEOs of the world. So it has served to me as a trigger to don't hold back in terms of the stuff that I share, and also the questions that I ask to these kind of people.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. All right. And you haven't held back when it comes to discovering and sharing advice for working smart, productivity stuff. Can you tell us what's perhaps one of the most surprising and fascinating or counterintuitive discoveries you've made about this game since you started looking into it?
So I think the biggest one for me is that the calendar is a really underlooked aspect for a lot of people. So that has a reason. I think I'm a huge fan of what David Allen wrote in Getting Things Done. And that's a big starting point for a lot of people when they think about how to structure their work. I found that in a time where we spend actually a lot of time in meetings still, and we have a lot of things going on in the calendar, that sometimes there is a disconnect. And that was where I struggled a lot a couple of years ago when implementing this. And I found a way of working around that. But actually, it starts with the calendar. For me, there was a big shift in terms of the level of sanity that I could achieve while doing something as simple as making sure that the calendar is an actual reflection of how I spend my time. And that since then, that has been some kind of a message that I'm trying to preach to people around me, and which ultimately led to writing the book.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so David Allen, for folks who are not familiar, he wrote Getting Things Done, which is fantastic, and we've interviewed him a couple times. including toward the beginning. What a guy, before the show was big enough to be meaningful for his publicity. Episode 15-ish. Thanks, David. And so I recommend listeners check out his work. It's so good. And the general vibe being, hey, download all the stuff out of your brain. It's for having ideas, not for holding them.
Exactly.
Have them in organized lists. Know what your projects and next actions are associated with those projects. And you'll feel a sense of sort of freedom, and things will become unstuck. And it's really true. I think about it kind of like exercise. It really works, and it's also really easy to fall off the wagon and stop doing it.
Exactly.
Because, hey, more stuff comes at us all the time. And so you got to be pretty vigilant and pick yourself up when you do fall. So when you talk about the calendar and the disconnect, was the disconnect you're referring to is your calendar is not actually truthfully reflecting or displaying what you're doing with the hours in your life? Is that the disconnect?
Yes, there's basically two things. So one is that if you have a sense of the projects and the tasks that you need to accomplish to get these projects done, there's two big things that I found that I needed to add to make the system work. And one is to make the connection with when something is going to happen. And of course, what David is saying is that there are a certain set of context where a task can be executed well.
Yeah. And
then you just start off with this list. But this list is endless, of course. And
it really does get big.
It really gets big.
I've got 1,800 items in my OmniFocus inbox.
Exactly. And I have the same. And I feel that when I was discussing this with people, it gets really overwhelming and it never gets done. And especially in a time where there is no clear, like I'm opening the door of my office, I walk in and then I walk out of there at 5 p.m. There's no closure anymore. So we need some boundaries. And if they are not there anymore in the physical world, we need to build them in our, like in a digital world and in our own management of how we manage time. So the sense of when is it done, it will never get done. Our work is never done.
That's true.
So artificially, we need something. And I found that in the calendar. So that's one. And two, I found that there's a disconnect between where I am now and where I'm going with this. And for me, that's like David is describing this in getting things done with this, like the different levels of height that you're looking at your life, like different 1,000-foot levels. And I struggle with implementing this. So how do I do this on a, like, how does this link to my day-to-day stuff? So you have your weekly review, of course, but how does this map out over the bigger things? And that's the second ingredient that I added in the second part of the book, is basically sharing how I do my quarterly goal setting, annual review, and stuff like that. How do I keep all this stuff in place? And again, that's the link to, okay, I know where I want to go, but when will this happen? Well, and I'm making the link to time again on this level.
Okay. Well, so that's a great point in terms of when does the work get done? Never, because it's endless. And I find, maybe just pause there for a moment, I find that just sort of emotionally that's difficult, because I really like to win and to feel like I'm winning. And I really don't like to lose or feel like I'm losing. Not that I will like bite your head off if you beat me in Monopoly or something, but I would prefer to win. And so it is with even more so with sort of my projects, my goals, the things that I'm trying to accomplish. And so then I guess I'm curious, how do you know, whether it's the course of a day or a week or an hour, that, hey, even though the work is endless and always coming at me, I can declare victory. I have checked the box and can call this a successful, day or week. How do you get there?
Well, if you zoom out, I think a big part of the way that we live, the stuff that we run into, is getting comfortable with the fact that the time on this planet is limited. And that means that we will find all kinds of ways to think that we have an endless opportunity to change stuff, to fix stuff, to start with things, to do stuff. And I think ultimately being really aware that this day has so many hours, and thus forcing me to upfront decide how I'm spending it, and then making sure that at least happens, will give me, and that's what I found, this gives me fulfillment, because this gives me a sense of, hey, I've mapped this out and this is what got done. So that's one perspective of looking at it. So that's like mapping it out again onto time does not only force me to figure out when I'm starting, but also when I'm done. And that gives me these this in between, these small milestones, these small runs, small days within a day where I can say, hey, I made this within the hour. I'm even faster, or I'm a bit slower, so I need to adapt. So it gives me these check-in points in the day. So that's one. And two is, what's the alternative? The alternative is that we assume that, we're not living with the fact that the time is limited to us. Mm-hmm. And we never really get close to this. Well, it gives a false sense of opportunity. And also, how do you prioritize if there's no boundaries? So in that sense, bringing that as close to the day as possible. So not thinking in a year all the time, but also in a day, really forced me to make the tougher decisions on, okay, is this what I'm planning now? Is that really worth my time if I look back on this? Well, most of the time I need to swap things around a lot, actually.
Yeah, that's intriguing. So that question, is this really worth my time if looking back on it in the future? So in terms of is there a specific articulation of that question, or maybe that's just it right there? I think a year from now, will I be pleased that I interviewed Rick in this moment? So far, the answer seems to be yes, Rick. Nice work. And so that's just all there is to it, or are there some more nuances or layers?
Yeah, so I think this is also part of a habit, right? And I think you and probably a lot of listeners might be familiar with the idea of doing a weekly check-in with yourself in the form of a review, or in the book, I call this a Friday recap, and expand on that a little bit. But in a sense, I think it's key to be aware that without dedicated moments to sit down and reflect on certain time skills, these insights won't really appear out of thin air, right? We need to work on that. We need to spend time on mulling this over and thinking about this stuff.
Yeah.
I think for me that the answer is also a structure where I no longer have to decide that I'm going to do it, but it's part of the structure. So it happens. It's not something that you negotiate with, just like you're not negotiating the fact that there will be a New Year's Eve. This is just what's there. In that sense, it should be something that's just part of the deal.
Yeah, intriguing. So I like that. So it's just there. It's just in the structure. And I guess maybe from a discipline motivation perspective, the first few times probably does require some will to do it. But then it's just sort of Fridays at 11 a.m. is just when the recap happens. That's just what happens. That's just it. And so Is it just that simple? After a few reps, then it's there?
I think ultimately there's two ways to look at it. One is there's the really habit forming approach, where you're looking at the technical parts of how will a habit get formed. And Atomic Habits is, of course, a great book if you want to dive into a lot of details around how you get yourself motivated and structured. There's also the other angle of what kind of value does this bring to my life? And I think again, for me, what I'm doing on a quarterly level, where I'm taking 1 or 2 evenings, and on a yearly level 1 or 2 full days to think about what happened in the last year and how will this next year look. Those are the times where the value of these weekly sessions really sink in. But I also see this if I skip it a week, and then the next week I feel I'm actually a worse person for it if I'm not doing it. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
And I experience that there's something lost if I'm not doing it. And that's where I feel this is not a trick. This is not something that I do because I feel it's good. I really experience that stuff will fall apart if I'm not doing it. But of course, there's also a connection between how do you make this super simple? And we have the tendency to make things more complicated if things are not working. And I get that. We bring in more complicated software if things is not. But actually, what really works is the other way around. If things are not working, take at least one piece of the puzzle out and then try it again. Make it simpler instead of more complicated.
Yeah, that reminds me of BJ Fogg's work in Tiny Habits. How can I make this easier is sort of the master question. And I think that's dead on.
Fully agree. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about the book Grip and some of the productivity experiments, but we've already sort of teased a little bit about sort of the daily plan, the Friday recap, the quarterly, the yearly. Can you just give us a couple key guiding light questions that you prompt yourself with at each of these intervals?
Okay, so on a weekly level, I'm thinking about, hey, what happened in the last week, what made me proud, what went well, and then what are some of the things that did not go as well as I thought they went. But also on a weekly level, it's way more tactical. It's way more like I'm tapping each item in my calendar to see if there's any loose ends. I follow the structure that also David Allen brought us, like, hey, go over each project and make sure that there's a next action. Like, this is a basic checklist. And then if I move to the quarterly level, I'm specific on using quarters because a month is way too short and a year is too long for setting any type of goal. So that's why I'm using quarters. Also, it links really well with how a corporate structure works. So you can also fold in your work plans a lot easier. And then I'm asking questions like, on the level of one goal, so how did my goals go? Did I manage them? And if not, why? On category level for each quarter, I have a couple of questions around, hey, am I, like, in my work, what kind of stuff do I actually want to spend my time on if I'm purely reasoning from my own perspective? But also shifting towards more personal questions like, hey, think about your friends, think about your family. How do you evolve in this network of people, and what do you bring to each of these members of your family, friends, and group around you? So going over these set of questions, zooming out on a quarterly level and also on a yearly level, you see that gradually it moves from tactical to strategic. Where do I want to go as a person, if that makes sense?
That's cool. All right. Well, so let's hear, it sounds like we've already hit a lot of it, but what's sort of like the big idea or main thesis behind your book, Grip, which will soon be released in English to us Yankees. And let's hear about some of the intriguing productivity experiments that are inside of it.
Yeah. So basically, what I've done is I wrote a guide that I would have found super useful if it was my first job. And it contains a structure for having a better week. And that starts with the 3 components: calendar, task manager, email or / communication, and this Friday recap or weekly review. That's the first part of it. And basically what I found missing is that there's a lot of books and ideas that zoom in on one of these specifics and give you a really helpful tool. But how does this fit in to the life that I have to manage? There's a lot of stuff going on. And how does this fit into the Slack channels that are also there and WhatsApp that's also there? I need to deal with this. How do I make this happen? So that's the first part of the book. And then, of course, the second part builds on top of that with the goal setting. Like, goal setting to me is like, a lot of people get mad if I start talking about setting goals because
how dare you?
They have indeed, fully agree. But like they have this instant negative response because people are using goals in the wrong way. Like, they're used on them, not with them. It's like something that gets managed for them.
Got you. Here are your goals, Rick. For this quarter, you will be doing these goals.
It's more of it's a stick. And what I also hear is that it's something that is spoken about a lot. Like, you discuss it a lot at work. And then ultimately, of course, a couple of weeks in, you get completely different directions from it. Like, we're not able to stick to them as well. Like, so of course it brings in a negative response. So my goal was to give you something that you can actually play with that brings you something as a person.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. And so you've done some experiments, huh? Let's hear some of the results.
Yeah. So one of the things that I love, and this is not rocket science, right? But one of the things that I'm a huge fan of is how can you break things down to the point that you do them today. And this is something that I've seen work for a lot of people. But of course, we have these big dreams and big ideas. And ultimately, what I found, one of the first things that I've done, aside from the main job that I had at the startup back then, is that I found that it was hard to do a specific type of research in the team. And people were always saying like, yeah, we need more time to do research, and complaining basically about, the decisions that were made. And then I thought like, how can I break this down as much as possible? We were building a new version of the onboarding of one of the apps that I was working on. And then onboarding meaning the process of signing up and then getting a new account. So then I thought, okay, what can I do every single day? Well, let me review one specific onboarding for another app, and then write a brief blog post about it and post that. So ultimately, after after a month, I had quite a collection actually of work, which was super simple to do. Like it was precisely in my circles of stuff that I found interesting, that I'm good at, that give me a good feeling, and also had a good mix with and edge with the stuff that we were doing at work. And so this is one example, which ultimately led to writing an article for A List Apart, which is one of the blogs that I still am a fan of for years, which I found super exciting. So then one thing leads to another. That also led ultimately to the second follow-up project, which was write a newsletter for every single day of 2016. And that led to ultimately writing the book because I had this material. And then, of course, ultimately people start asking me like, hey, how do you manage this? Well, then I point back to the starting point, which was just writing for 15 minutes a day. And that we all have time for, right? So I think that was one of the experiments that I started with super small and then, kept on improving and kept on building upon, which is one of the core things that I still do every single day.
Well, that's so fun. So, and I'm just imagining in your workplace, like, oh boy, Rick's the onboarding expert. So, like he's the master of onboarding. And it's like, okay, so I signed up for an app a day and wrote about what happened when I got on board for 15 minutes. And I did that for, 20 days, a total of 5 hours. And now I am like the almighty onboarding. What is that fair? I'm just sort of making assumptions.
That is fair. This is completely fair. But also, as soon as you do this yourself, you start looking at the other stuff that gets published, get written, and people get idolized for with different eyes. Because sure, there are some things that are truly a ton of work, of course. But a lot of things are also a culmination of tiny bits and bytes every single day. And if you know that, then you also know that, like if you publish hundreds of podcast episodes like you did, people start asking you, how do you actually manage this? Of course, it's one episode at a time, right?
That's right. Yep.
Like one step at a time. And I think, you underestimate what we can do if we do this for a longer period of time, which is super powerful, I guess.
That's true. Well, I'm gonna stop myself from ranting about how when you Google something, all 10 results look suspiciously similar. Often, not always, but often. It's like, I know what you're doing, everybody. I know what you're doing. And it irritates me. Anyway.
Are you saying with that these type of habits are causing this?
No, I'm just saying, you look at a body of work with a different set of eyes after producing something. It's true in that I know that there are SEO articles out there saying, Google something, look at the top 10 results, and then repackage them. And hopefully your domain authority or whatever will push you to be on the top results. Now you get some traffic. Well, thanks. You've made the world no better. And I find that annoying. That's my hot take. Anyway, not super relevant. But
no, I get what you're saying. And I think what is true in that is that if you use any type of these kind of hacks to make yourself do stuff, it also matters what you then do. Of course, and the direction matters. And I think this is also why I love the saying of Stephen Covey, you can run up a ladder as fast as possible. But if this ladder is set against the wrong wall, why are you doing it?
Exactly.
What's the ultimate perspective? And I think this is what happens in a lot of stuff that you can just copy and paste tips and tricks. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, the combined effort of small steps every day can really surmount to a huge body of work.
Absolutely.
That, other people will recognize, but that's not the goal. That's not really the goal. The goal is like, how can you move this mountain for yourself?
Well, yeah. And I guess fundamentally, it just feels more generous and loving in the world. Like you've created something that is truly useful as opposed to something that's just useful for your own sake. Like, okay, hey, I managed to get some clicks, but I've made the world no better.
Now what? Yeah.
It just sits me the wrong way. But anyway, bit by bit. But also, my other thing I wanted to say about that was I remember back in my consulting days when we were fresh recruits and we would look at people building these elaborate Excel models. And they'd show us an example like, oh, hey, yeah, so here's something I made. And we'd be like, oh my gosh, that's insane. There's like 50 different sheets and they all interrelate and you can automatically update one assumption, then it flows into all these other places. And it was just like wildly intimidating. And but then they always said the same thing. It's like, well, I mean, hey, this didn't start out that way. I mean, one day we said I had to figure out this one thing, and I said, okay, so had a very rough one sheet thing, and then we said, well, hey, actually, there's some really dynamic assumptions working underneath it. So I said, okay, so I made 2 other pages to reflect that, which then linked to the first one, and they said, well, hey, well, there's another section of things, and so again, it just sort of builds bit by bit, and then when it's unveiled in its entirety, whether it's a whole book or a glorious Excel model or whatever, it's like, oh my gosh, that's insane. Maybe I could never do that. It was like, well, no one can in one day. It grows up bit by bit and then it becomes something awesome.
Yeah, I do want to add to one of the previous things that you mentioned on, is it actually worthwhile what you're doing? That I do tend to believe that most of this does not happen out of malintent or out of purposefully making something that's not useful or just useful for yourself. I think ultimately we do want to build or make something, most people, that is in some way deeply useful for ourselves, but also for others. And I think if there's in your life no structure around how do you gather insights that help you course correct, who is your sounding board in that sense? Who are the people around you that can speak to you about this? Who do you use as a sounding board to reflect on how kind of ethical and moral choices you're making? I believe that this is also a hugely important part where you can, 1, stand out from the pack, and 2, can have huge effects on the direction that you're following. If there's if you're listening to this and you don't have an answer to this, you don't have a way to think about this, to deconstruct these issues, you're not course correcting.
Yeah.
And that's when you're missing out, I believe.
Yeah, that's well said in terms of if you don't have something, some guideposts or values or people to bounce things off of, and you just go down an optimizing, shortcutty pathway to maximize something, you're going to get into some gross results. I don't know if this is true, but I heard a conversation with Bethany McLean and Seth Godin, and one of them said that if you continually split test A/B, what gets better results and clicks, a website, it will always devolve into porn. And I don't know if that's true, but there is a kernel of truth, I think, to it in terms of what's more exciting, in terms of capturing a click. If it's more clickbaity or provocative, it does tend to, in the short term, get more people curious enough to take a look. So yeah, that's a great point about zooming out and getting the broad perspective. But I want to zoom back in. So with calendars, you noted a disconnect, and so you've taken it to a whole nother level here in terms of you're not just using your calendar a little bit differently. You have raised $3 million. I see. Congratulations, to build a full-blown new bit of calendar software. What's the scoop here?
Yeah. So if you think about when you do your best work, if you think about when you want to be focused, when you want to have your meetings, you will probably have some idea, and your listeners will probably have some idea too. Otherwise, you won't be listening to this. But the question now is, okay, think about the rest of your team. Think about your teammates. Think about the people you possibly manage, the people that you interact with within the company. You probably have no idea. Or maybe okay, this guy is working mostly late shifts. This is not a morning person. Okay, but that's as far as it goes. With Rise, what we want to do is not just build the calendar as an Excel sheet that you fill in, but actually we want to fold these signals into a calendar. That's what we actually done in the last year. We built a scheduling engine that takes this stuff into account. So personal profile, but also the meetings and stuff that you are attending already. And if you request a time, if you say, hey, I want to meet for 1 hour with colleague A, B, and C in the next week, we will schedule that on a time that's saving as many focus time minutes as possible for the whole team on average. And so that's the biggest thing. We don't just want to build a pretty calendar, which is something that I think we do, but that's not the core, because the gist of it is we want you to be in and out, but actually want to help you preserve as much time to focus on what actually matters, but also have better meetings because they are scheduled at times where you can perform at their best. And that's something that's also linking back to the book, but also and in how you structure your week, is that we arrived in a time where we just assume that we perform on this very same level on Monday mornings as Thursday afternoons, or at least we expect that of ourselves. Well, that's of course not true. And the same is what we're doing on a year, like on the scale of a year. We just assume and expect from ourselves, from our team, that we perform at our best at all times. Well, that's not how nature works, right? So there's times where we are just not so focused as we could possibly be. There's times in the year where we need to re-energize. And I think those are things that we actually know, that are proven by science, that are backed by research, and stuff that we want to fold into this engine to make sure that you no longer have to think about this stuff, but actually have a calendar guide you to having better days and better weeks.
That's certainly intriguing. I guess I'm wondering if there are low importance meetings that you you can schedule for people's least juicy times. And although I don't know if anyone hosting a meeting likes to think of it as low importance, but sometimes they might. It's like, yes. Hey, these are just the updates that we're obliged to do by law or something.
There's one way to think about that, and that is there is no way for a team to set any type of guardrails about how much time you spend in meetings. So there is basically just saying, hey, can we put it in this week or not? Like that's what we were thinking about. So that's also hard to think about more weeks because there's just so much data to consider if you think about just scheduling in a meeting. And you say low priority meetings, well, like we know this, but it's just too big of a mental hurdle to think about the other possibilities. But that we can do. So what happens in Rise is if you schedule a meeting and the meeting load for the team crosses the boundary that you set as a team, it will suggest, hey, possibly move these to next week. And in a lot of situations, that's fine. There's a lot of stuff that can wait.
Well, I guess I'm curious then, in terms of for our own selves, maybe Rise does some of this, what are the best times to work, and to what extent are there universals versus individual personal preferences, and how do we masterfully deduce those and work with them?
I think roughly and this is not rocket science, but roughly there's two types. There's the morning owls and there's the late night, the people that perform better later in the day. Mm-hmm. And I think if you take those as archetypes, you can split those again into two groups. But roughly speaking, there's half of the population that really wants to have their focus time early in the day and have their meetings maybe a little bit start around 11 in the morning or just after lunch and then continue into the afternoon. And there's another group that prefers to have their meetings in the morning, so to get them done, and have their peak time around 3 or 4 p.m. and then continues later in the day. And additionally to this, there's also, of course, a group that is really productive in the evenings while there is no distractions, there is no things going on. What you do see is that you can ask yourself if that happens because of the distractions or because they are truly more productive at that time. So I think that's an interesting thing that we're going to unpack, especially in the next couple of years when people are and will be way more experimenting with disconnecting the usual work times and figuring out more like, hey, but if there's no construct of an office anymore, and if we can let go of the times more, like you need to appear at 9 in Slack and then disappear from Slack in at 6, what will happen to our productivity if that's truly possible? But in a sense, I see two big groups. So either one in the morning or in the afternoon to focus.
Okay, cool. Well, before we hear about some of your favorite things, can you give us maybe a top do and a top don't in the realm of calendar, task manager, and communications?
Okay, so top do would be, one, make sure that what you do is reflected in this calendar. So one, it's meetings, but two, add to that preparation time, processing time, travel time. Those are three that are very often overlooked. And of course, you are not the person that is not preparing their meetings, but all the other people are. So, but we can actually set a good example and make sure that we have the preparation time booked in. Otherwise, it won't happen. And then connect to that. Make sure that what you're actually working on, so all your tasks, your biggest tasks that need to happen should be in the calendar. That's what I absolutely believe. That gives a signal to the team. That gives a signal to the people that try to book something in. But also, it's a huge thing for yourself to see a notification pop up and say, you need to work on this right now, because now there's no excuse anymore. So I'm really saying, make sure that what's in there, that's also something that you're not negotiating with anymore. So it's really something that you should actually do. So that's really the do part. And the other two parts is what you already mentioned. If it's in you should not use your brain for storage. Like if that, of course, that's a mantra that people hear on this channel a lot, but that's really something that you should not do, because you should use your brain as working memory to focus on what's at hand, right? And then the final one for me would be schedule time for communication and let that happen at a set time, because one that's a skill. Communication is something that we value, like we're not cutting it out. But very often what happens, of course, we do our chats and our email while on the go, while we're, I don't know, in line in the grocery store. And of course, we're not reading things well. We're not having we're not having our full attention. And of course, stuff runs off the rails with that, right? Because we're not reading. So I would suggest block off time in your calendar to do this communication. If we really value it as part of our work, it should be there.
All right. Well, Rick, now can you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
My key quote that I return to is the one, of course, from old President Eisenhower. Like, there's stuff that's urgent but not important. Most of the things that are urgent are not important, and most of the things that are important are not urgent. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's something that, like, every day is challenging me so much to really think about, if someone puts something on my plate, is that truly because it's like, should I accept this because it really fits where I'm going? Or do I do this because, well, really someone else requests this of me?
Yeah. And how about a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
Okay, so the one that I found really intriguing is still the study that's about how much time do we need to return to our tasks when we are disrupted by something, or when we are disturbed by something. And there is a study that's often quoted, which is that we need, what is it now, 24 minutes, 23 minutes?
I was thinking the Microsoft study, 24 minutes. You got something fresh for me, Rick?
No, we all talk about this study. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel that I need this amount of time to return to the task. But still, we talk and think about it, and we use this to, I don't know, take certain directions in how we shape our days and how we like. So I feel like this is something that I hope in the brief, short time, I hope near time, we will discover that there's actually something else happening. And how can we, in a world where so much is happening around us, when we are disrupted a lot, can we find a way where we're not dependent on our own discipline so much to get done what needs to get done? So there's these paradigms where, of course, if you look at deep work, for example, and actually part of Rise is built on top of that, you need as many undisturbed blocks of time to really do work that's important. And that's the idea that most of us start from. But the question is that something can we invent something that really breaks with this pattern, that allows us to combine both the fact that we are available instantly with the fact that we can produce meaningful work if we are still, in a way, connected and sometimes interrupted by something. That's something that I'm fascinated about.
Mm-hmm. And a favorite book?
One that I reread a lot is one of the earliest productivity books, and that's How to Live on 24 Hours a Day. I don't know if you know it. It's a really thin one, and I think it's 1997, something like that it was written. And I love it because he's basically describing that we tend to focus our work in 8 hours a day. And we have around 8 hours of rest. And then still there's quite a lot of time left. And he's basically saying, okay, if we can, instead of focusing on how can we make these 8 hours at work more productive, if we think, how can we meaningfully spend those other 8 hours, that's, of course, a 2x improvement, which is really hard to do with incremental, really small changes in, our day-to-day software and our to-do list and our hacking, our kind of stuff. And I think this is, to me, a really useful reminder that I need to be conscious about, or can be conscious about, this other segment of my day as well.
Mm-hmm. And a favorite tool?
Yeah, well, the calendar is an easy one for me. For me, that's something that I begin the day with and end the day with. I'm actually on the first version of Rise now, which is really nice. And then connected to that, I'm also a huge OmniFocus fan. So that's my go-to task manager.
And favorite habit?
Favorite habits would be, for me, that we have been doing a smoothie every single day for, I don't know, 10 years. Every morning, I make this.
What's in the smoothie? Rick, we have to know.
It's all veggies. So, and we started off, and I think this is, again, something that you can, like, you have to ease in a little bit, because like I have some friends that drink the stuff that we make and they're like, what are you drinking? Because this is disgusting. But like, I do feel that while I cannot prove this, that this has a lot of long-term healthy effects on my energy during the day, but also long-term, what kind of stuff do I consume, and do I get the proper amount of nutritional value in my body? So we started off with a lot of fruit, and then over time gradually replaced fruit by more vegetables. And that has been something that's, well, I would say something that the longest running habit that I've been doing, actually.
And so let's see, like this morning, what was the recipe in terms of vegetables?
Yeah. Okay, so there's the fruit that's in there is unpeeled bananas, because in the peel of the banana, there is most of the fiber, actually. So I wash the banana and then put it in. There is, what is it, linseed, I guess? How do you call it?
Okay.
In there. There is carrots, there is spinach, there is kale, there is avocado.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the same, huh? Avocado. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So avocado is in there. And for flavor, I use cacao, is it in Dutch?
Oh, cacao.
Yeah.
Chocolate.
But then, of course, the pure biological version, which is in powder.
All right.
And spirulina.
Mm-hmm. That's something. Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And water. And that's it.
There you go. Cool. All right.
Yeah.
And tell us, is there a key nugget you share that seems to connect and resonate with folks they quote back to you often?
Yeah. So what they're saying is the first thing that they discover when they start to put in the work in the calendar, saying, I have way too much on my plate. So how do I, give me a tip to compress it all in? And of course, the answer is there is no way. There is no way that's happening. And that's exactly the exercise that you should go through, because now you start to see that it will never all fit, and you need to start to make the decisions that matter.
All right. And if folks want to learn more, get in touch, where would you point them?
I'm quite active on Twitter. That's where I'm sharing my stuff. There's also, that's Rick Pastoor on Twitter. That's also where I refer to my newsletter and the other stuff that I'm working on, but that's the place to find me.
Okay. And you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
I would say that being diligent about how you spend your time, not only on a weekly basis, but I would challenge the people, especially from this podcast, to also spend time on the longer horizon and not just following what's offered in the workplace, but consciously thinking about what's your system, your structure there, because that's where you find the real impact.
All right. Rick, thank you. This has been a treat. I wish you much luck and fun with the book and with Rise and all your adventures.
Thank you so much for having me.
I really loved what Rick had to say about your calendar. Is it actually a reflection of where you spend your time? Because often calendars look like meeting, absolutely nothing. It's quite misleading in terms of you don't have these hours of space of the day where you're doing nothing, chilling, sleeping, playing video games, nothing. In fact, you're up to stuff. And if you want to make sure you're up to the right stuff that really moves where you want to be moving in terms of your goals that you're setting quarterly, then make sure your calendar is reflecting that and you've got that stuff scheduled right in there. Great stuff from Rick. Again, the show notes, the transcript, the links to items we've referenced are at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP740. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.